Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over the layout and the controls for the StudioLive board. We're going to start at the top of the board and then identify the controls pretty much throughout the board. Now this is a 24-channel board. The 16-channel and the 32-channel boards are also very similar. They just have different numbers of channels. Now starting at the top of the board, you can see we have the input section. For each of the channels, we have a gain knob. It's labeled mic line because you can connect either to the microphone input on each channel or the line input on the back of the board. There's also a 48-volt phantom power button for powered condenser mics. You can turn that on. It's selectable per channel on the board. So if I wanted to turn it on here, you can see I can just hit the button, turn phantom power on and off. Great thing about that and about this board in general is that those buttons light up very nicely. The input section also contains a switch to switch these inputs between the analog inputs from the jacks on the back to the digital input that would be a return off your computer. So if you're playing back from the computer through the board, you'd need to hit this button, and that will turn the digital inputs on. If you're on the AI series boards, this is labeled D on this. If you're on the classic boards, you've got this firewire symbol. Now the input channel continues on down to the bottom part of the board, and you can see that for every channel here, you've also got select, solo, mute, and then your fader. So you can really think about kind of skipping over the fat channel and the aux section when you're thinking about the dedicated controls for the channel. It comes in, for instance, if you're on channel 12, it comes in here, and then your signal would pick up down here for dedicated controls. Now the next section down is the auxiliary output section, or the aux out section. We have these are tied to aux out jacks on the back, and this controls the level to those auxes. You can see we've got 1 through 10. That's the number of auxes we have on this board. We have more auxes on the 32-channel board, less on the 16-channel board, but they work the same way. This is the level to the aux output. You actually set up what's going to the aux output or mixing for like your monitors using these knobs here. We'll get to that later on when we get into how to mix monitors. But the auxes are typically used for monitor sends. You can also use these aux outs to send off to your external effects. I've got 2 of them set up here. We'll be going over that in this video series as well. Now also on the aux section, you can see that there's FXA and FXB. These are effects buses. Those effects buses are routed to the internal effects processors that are built into the StudioLive. We'll be covering that as well, but that kind of completes this aux output section. Then the famous fat channel is the middle blue section, and these controls will be adapted to whichever channel or bus where you hit the select button. So if I want to assign these fat channel controls to, say, 13, my bass guitar channel here, I just hit the select, and now all of these become active for this particular channel. And this fat channel gives you an incredibly powerful set of tools for doing EQ and dynamics like compression, as well as all the routing functions for the channel are also handled there, as well as stereo linking and other things that we'll be getting into. Now one trick to see where you might use these controls, all the different buses and channels where they work, is to hit the copy button. When you hit copy, it lights up all these blue select buttons, and anywhere you see these blinking, these are the areas where you can use the fat channel. So that includes all of your auxes, it includes your main output, all these subgroups, and your auxiliary inputs as well. I'll just hit copy again to cancel that. That's sort of a trick just to identify where you can apply the fat channel. The fat channel controls are kind of interesting because these knobs are endless. They're called encoders, and so those knobs, as you turn them, you can see they don't have a pointer on them. Like if we look at our normal knob, it ends. If you turn it all the way down, it's got a pointer. These encoders, you can spin them around pretty much forever. You can tell where they're positioned by looking on this LED bar graph. This LED bar graph also has multiple functions depending on what you're doing. Like in this particular case, this shows the amount of compression or the compression ratio. If we're over here on the equalizer, let's turn the equalizer on, you can see this adjusts the frequency of the midband. If we turn that on, and that's the width and that's the gain. So you can see where you're at because as you turn the knob, you can see what's happening up here on this LED bar graph. So the fat channel is a great innovation with the StudioLive board. It also keeps the board nice and compact without being confusing. Now let's take a look over here. This is the master section of the board. Starting at the top, it's got meters. This meter is for whichever channel is selected. So if I'm going to select the bass channel and play a little bit of music through it. I'll solo it as well. So you can see that the selected channel gets the meter up here. This is gain reduction for the compressor on that channel. You can also see that that's kicking in with gain reduction. These meters are dedicated for the level of the subgroups, and then this is left and right for the main. The subgroups are these faders down here. We'll get into those in more detail in later videos, but essentially you can use the subgroups for a number of things, including like mixing your drums, for instance, to one of the subgroups, kind of the way I've got it set up here. There's a BNC connector here for a little light. If you connect this like this, you can see you can put a little light on the subject so you can read your set list. I'll take that off because it's probably in the way of the camera. This is a digital effects and master control. This gives you the ability to tweak the internal effects processors. Also, if you hit system here, you can page up and down through some core setup things. There's a tap tempo button, as well as the ability to handle presets. So you can save and store scenes into memories in this, and we'll go through that separately as well. Now the next part of the master section is the meters section. These buttons allow us to choose what to do with the LED bar graph meters in the fat channel. When we're not using it as a fat channel, we can use it kind of like what we used to call a meter bridge. If I hit input, these now show the level of all your input signals. I'll turn off this solo and play back a little bit, and you'll see how that looks. You can click here and it becomes output meters. If you click here, it becomes gain reduction meters for the compressors across all the channels. Fantastic. You also have some cool features to see the level of your aux outs, as well as locate the faders. Since we don't have motorized faders, we can hit this when we load a preset, and it will help us guide the main faders, or all the channel faders, into the correct position. There are two additional channels that are available with level controls right here, input A and input B. These are stereo inputs on the back of the board, and usually I use these for effects returns for dedicated outboard effects. I'll show you how those set up, but you can actually really connect anything you want here, and you have full fat channel processing on these. They are full balanced quarter-inch TRS inputs on the back of the board. Now as we move on down, this is the Q section. The Q section is really the bus that controls what we hear when we're listening through headphones, when we're soloing. So if I solo, this cue is really important to what you're going to hear. There's also a solo in place that I have on right now. Solo in place usually you'd use for sound check. You'd leave it off during the show. 2-track in simply allows you to connect an iPod or an iPhone or some other sort of a tape in. You can also use it as a firewire return for 2-track firewire return if you want to play back from your computer. We have dedicated phones level, which is the phone jack that's on the front edge of the board right under here. And then this is the monitor level. There's outputs on the back that you normally would connect to control room monitors, which you would have if you used this board in a studio. You might also use that if you're in a fixed install. So anyway, you can control the level of those separately, and you can also control what's being routed into the monitors and the phones using these buttons here. There's a complete talkback section here, so you can talk back to the stage. This controls the talkback mic level. There's a special XLR input on the back for the talkback mic, also routing for where you want talkback to go, and when you want to talk, you turn on the talk button, say what you need to say, and turn it back off. You can route that to the aux outputs or to the main, and usually you would use this to communicate with your artists in the studio or up on the stage. The GEQ is for graphic equalizers, and we can apply graphic equalizers to a number of spots in the board. We'll go over that in a separate video. This is a select for the main output, which allows you to apply the fat channel to the main output. Now there's one more thing that's really obvious on this board, and that's this bright red LED, this 2-character LED. If I select, it tells you exactly what channel is currently selected. So if I select channel 9, you can see it goes to channel 9. If I go up here and select one of the aux outputs, you can see it says A5. I can even select fat channel processing on the effects. You can see that says FXA. And if I select here, it says effects B. If I select the main, it says in A. I'm not sure exactly why, but that means main output. And if I select here, you can see that's sub 4, sub 3, sub 2, and sub 1. And that's what you'll see right here in the selected channel display. With that, we've covered all the controls on the board in a very superficial way to just help you identify what everything is. Now, starting in the next video, we're going to go over everything in more detail so you can get really familiar with how to use this board and the essential things you need to mix a live show. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.